Dr. Turner's obsession. Dr. Michael Turner squinted at the faded map spread across his desk, the corners of its paper curling with age. He traced a finger over the rough lines leading through a dense green sprawl labelled in cautious script as La Boca de la Selva. The ink was smudged, the handwriting nearly illegible, but the message was clear. Somewhere in the depths of the Peruvian jungle, far from any marked road or village, lay an ancient ruin, one that had swallowed countless explorers whole, leaving behind nothing but vague whispers of its existence. Turner had spent years pursuing artifacts and ancient secrets, seeking out hidden corners of the world with an insatiable hunger for discovery. But La Boca de la Selva was different. It had haunted him in ways no other sight ever had, creeping into his dreams as an inescapable shadow. He could still feel the unease that followed him after those dreams. Dark, dense foliage, the eyes of unseen creatures staring out at him through the trees. He would wake drenched in sweat, the sound of something faint, like chanting, ringing in his ears. Locals refused to speak of the ruin, their silence laced with fear. Stories told of those who had entered its gates and never returned. They called it the mouth of the jungle, a temple built by an ancient civilization to honor a dark god, one that consumed souls. Most modern scholars dismissed the place as a legend, yet Turner believed it was real. He felt it in his bones, a pull he couldn't resist, as if something in that ruin was calling to him. One particular night, he had sat alone in his study, poring over every scrap of information he could find. The more he read, the more he felt drawn to it, as though the ruin itself was extending a hand through the pages, pulling him closer. And as his research grew, so did his reputation in the archaeological community. A man driven, they called him, maybe even obsessed. But Turner didn't care. This would be his crowning achievement, the discovery that would immortalize his name. By morning, he was convinced. He would go to Peru, despite the legends, despite the danger. La Boca de la Selva was calling, and he was ready to answer. The journey to La Boca de la Selva was as grueling as it was dangerous. Dr. Turner's team was small but skilled. Mateo, a seasoned local guide with a weathered face and sharp eyes, knew the jungle well. Sarah, a historian, had an encyclopedic knowledge of pre-Columbian civilizations and carried a journal that was already filling with sketches and notes. Ben, a former soldier, was there for protection, his quiet confidence reassuring Turner that they were prepared for whatever the jungle might throw at them. But no one could have prepared them for the strangeness that started almost as soon as they set foot on the jungle trail. The first night, they made camp under a canopy of twisted trees. The air was thick and damp, the ground littered with rotting vegetation. Around them, the jungle was alive with sounds, the shrill calls of unseen birds, the rustling of leaves, the distant howl of some unknown creature. But as the fire crackled and cast dancing shadows across the trees, there was something else. A low, whispering sound that seemed to rise and fall with the night wind. Turner couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows flickered at the edge of the firelight, and he felt a chill crawl up his spine as he scanned the darkness. Mateo sat close to the fire, his face drawn and tense. He muttered under his breath a prayer in Spanish, and when Turner asked him what was wrong, he simply shook his head. La selva está viva, doctor, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The jungle is alive. There are things here, things that are not meant to be seen. Sarah laughed, trying to lighten the mood. Come on, Mateo, it's just a jungle. There's nothing here but trees and birds. But even she grew quiet when they heard it, a soft rustling in the underbrush, followed by what sounded like a whisper. It was so faint, like a voice just at the edge of hearing, calling to them from the darkness. Ben, ever the skeptic, grabbed his flashlight and swept it across the trees. "It's probably just the wind," he said. But Turner noticed the way his hand trembled slightly, the way his eyes darted back to the shadows again and again. The second day was worse. The heat was oppressive, the air thick and stifling. Insects buzzed around them, biting at exposed skin. Matteo led the way, cutting through the dense foliage with his machete, but even he seemed hesitant, glancing over his shoulder every few minutes. As they moved deeper into the jungle, they began to find strange carvings on the trees, symbols etched into the bark, faint and faded but unmistakably human. Sarah sketched each one, her curiosity mingling with unease as the symbols grew more disturbing. Some depicted elongated faces with hollow eyes, others twisted figures with claw-like hands reaching out as if to grab them. That night, they camped by a river, the sound of rushing water masking the unsettling whispers. But sleep was elusive. Turner lay awake, listening to the jungle, every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves setting his nerves on edge. He could have sworn he heard his own name being whispered in the darkness, a faint, ghostly voice calling him deeper into the jungle. Just before dawn, Ben stirred, muttering in his sleep. Turner watched as he sat up, eyes unfocused, and began to wander toward the river. Turner called his name, but Ben didn't respond, his movements slow and mechanical as he walked. Before he could reach the water, Turner and Matteo caught him, snapping him out of whatever trance had gripped him. Ben's face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror he couldn't explain. I thought I heard something," he murmured, looking over his shoulder as though expecting to see something standing there. By the time dawn broke, no one had slept, their nerves frayed, their minds fogged with exhaustion. But Dr. Turner's determination hadn't waned. If anything, the strange occurrences only fueled his desire to reach La Boca de la Selva. The ruin was close, he could feel it, a pulse in the air, a call that was growing stronger with every step. As they packed up camp, Matteo took Turner aside, his face grave. "This place," he whispered, glancing around as if the jungle itself were listening. "It is not safe. The spirits here, they are angry. They do not want us here." Turner dismissed his fears with a wave of his hand. "We're close, Matteo. This ruin could be the discovery of a lifetime. A few ghosts aren't going to stop us." But as they set off again, Turner couldn't shake the feeling that Matteo might be right. The jungle was alive, and it was watching them, waiting. The jungle seemed to grow denser as they moved closer to La Boca de la Selva. Trees towered above them, their branches twisted and knotted like skeletal hands reaching out to block their path. The air was thick, almost stifling, and a strange sense of heaviness settled over them, as though the very ground beneath their feet were resisting their progress. Turner noticed Sarah glancing around nervously, her eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to follow them. She muttered to herself, her hand constantly reaching for her notebook to sketch symbols and strange patterns that she swore she saw in the foliage. The others had noticed too. The jungle was changing, or perhaps it was revealing a side of itself they were never meant to see. That night, their camp felt more exposed than ever. The jungle pressed in around them, their small fire seeming to barely keep the shadows at bay. Matteo kept his machete close, his eyes scanning the darkness as he muttered under his breath. But even he couldn't hide his fear. Sarah tried to ease the tension, joking about the superstitions that seemed to haunt every step they took. "It's just the jungle playing tricks on us," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. They were woken in the middle of the night by a sound that froze them in place. It was a low, rhythmic drumming, echoing through the trees, accompanied by a faint, haunting chant. Turner felt his pulse quicken, a sense of dread tightening around him as the sound grew louder, reverberating in his chest. "Who else could be out here?" Ben whispered, gripping his flashlight tightly, his face pale. Matteo looked at them, his voice trembling. "It's not people," he whispered. "It's the spirits of La Boca de la Selva. They are calling us. Turner refused to believe it. He forced himself to remain calm, reassuring his team that it was just a coincidence, a trick of the jungle's sounds. But deep down he knew there was something unnatural about the way the noise seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, surrounding them, trapping them. When morning finally came, they packed up in silence, each of them haunted by the sounds that had kept them awake. But Turner's determination only grew stronger. They were close, he could feel it. A magnetic pull drawing him deeper, a whisper that told him the secrets of the ruin were just within reach. The path became treacherous, the ground slippery and uneven as though the jungle itself were trying to push them back. But Turner pressed on, his eyes fixed on the shadowy outline of the temple that finally appeared through the dense foliage. It was massive, towering above them with an air of ancient malevolence. Vines crept along its surface, and the stone was darkened with age, covered in symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. They entered the temple, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. The air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the air. The walls were covered in carvings, twisted faces, bodies contorted in agony, figures kneeling before an enormous, monstrous deity. Turner's heart pounded as he took it all in. This was what he had come for. This was his discovery, his legacy. But as he stepped forward, he felt a strange sensation, a cold, creeping feeling that wrapped around his limbs, pulling him down. The others watched in horror as his eyes glazed over, his body going rigid. He could hear their voices, muffled and distant, but he couldn't respond. He felt himself slipping, his consciousness fading as the darkness consumed him. When he awoke, he was alone, lying on the cold stone floor. The temple was silent, the oppressive weight of the jungle bearing down on him. He called out, but there was no response. The others were gone, their belongings scattered across the floor as though they had vanished into thin air. He staggered to his feet, his mind racing. He had to find them. He had to get out. But as he moved deeper into the temple, he realized the walls were shifting, the corridors twisting and changing. He was trapped, lost in a maze that seemed to have a life of its own. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, echoing through his mind, filling him with an unbearable sense of dread. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time had lost all meaning. Turner wandered through the endless halls, his mind unraveling as the darkness closed in around him. He was alone, his legacy forgotten, his discovery lost to the jungle. And as the shadows claimed him, he realized the truth. He had been called here, lured into the depths by the ancient spirits of La Boca de la Selva. The ruin was alive, and it had claimed him, just as it had claimed all those who had come before. And in the silent, suffocating darkness, he knew he would never leave.